My name is Todd Williams. I'm assistant professor of educational and instruction and leadership at Southeastern Oklahoma State University. Um, if you're wondering about my background, I'll get to that in a minute. But some of you are probably thinking, well, he's either ex-military or he's an ex-coach. Sadly to say, I did not serve a day in the military, but I have coached a game or two, and so my background is. It is a little bit in athletics, but I want you to know I was one of those coaches that took the classroom very, very seriously, which is why I moved from a position as a teacher and coach after 8 years into administration, and eventually on into superintendency. But one of the best job, and I'll just share this with each of you, the best job I've ever had is being in a classroom with students. Probably the best job I ever had was 5 years as a teacher and a coach, and working with high school students at the secondary level. That's probably the best job I've had. The second best job I've ever had is the one I have now, as an assistant professor at Southeastern Oklahoma State University. But I'll get to that in a minute. The whole idea here today is I want you to realize this is something that happened to me personally in my journey as a college professor. I have gone from being a practitioner to now I am working a lot in the area of theory. And it's been an interesting journey for me so far, but I'll just transition with that onto the second slide here. My background info, and I'm just assuming everyone can see this okay. Somebody might send me a chat message just to confirm that, but
you're good to go, Todd. Yeah, it's good.
Okay, thank you, Brad. Background info on me is I retired in 2016 after a 30-year career in public education, all of which was spent in the state of Texas. First started out as a teacher and a coach. I spent 8 years in the classroom and coaching various sports throughout. And then after 8 years of that, I began a 22-year career in school administration, which started as assistant principal at a junior high, and then spent a year doing that, and then 2 years as assistant principal at the high school level before I was able to secure the first principal's job. And then that led to the superintendency, where I spent 16 years of my career as a superintendent at three very different and diverse school districts in Texas. One was a very small school district in rural East Texas. The other one was a little more suburban. And the last one was the Chapter 41 district, where we were property wealthy and had students from very, very different backgrounds. It was a really interesting school district, but I had a great career, and somehow I managed to survive 30 years of that, because it can get very tricky in public education. One thing that I can honestly say is I was not prepared to deal with politics. Politics have no place in public education, but they become very, very real in the life of a school administrator, especially in the superintendent's job. And after about 16 years of that, I'd had my fill of it and then retired, and that was nice. But began my career in higher ed in 2017 as an assistant professor in the EIL department here at Southeastern Oklahoma State. And just wanted you to know that our program at Southeastern, the one that I am working in, the MED program, we're 100% online. I teach right now, I currently teach my classes from this room in my home. Sometimes I do it from my office at Southeastern, but with the pandemic and the way it's affected things, we are not required to be on campus all the time. So one thing that I wanted to stress, though, as I launch into the meat of this presentation, is that very last bullet on this slide 2, and that is that developing relationships in an online format is very difficult. However, it can be done. And I just want to share with you one thing that happened with me about the second year of my career as a college professor. So if you look at slide 3 with me, I titled this as the aha moment one night during class. This particular class was in, I believe, 2018. Started out as any other class does. I'll log in anywhere from 15 minutes to 10 minutes ahead of time. And I just spend time talking to students and getting to know them, ask them where they're from, what is their background, what are they currently doing, and why they chose our program at Southeastern. And, just chit chat, trying to get to know students, waiting for the hour to start. My classes all meet on Wednesday nights, and anywhere from 5, 6 to 7 o'clock at night. And we have 1 hour. Our requirement is in our department is that you spend 1 hour a week in Zoom meetings with your students. So what led to the second point is I noticed one student was missing again for the second week in a row. And this particular student, she was always very prompt and always present for class. And, as a teacher, we learn to you get concerned about students when they're not there. And so I commented about that as I was starting the class. And another student chimed in and said, "Dr. Williams, are you aware about this particular student and what has happened to her?" And I said, "No, what's going on?" And she just very quickly informed me that her husband had committed suicide like 3 weeks before, and I was unaware. And that really bothered me to hear that. And because I knew she had children, I knew a little bit about her background, although she was in Oklahoma and I was in Texas. It made me what it did is it led me to reach out to her the next day, and I just confirmed all this and was able to establish a connection on a personal level that she really appreciated. But back to our discussion about what's happening today, if you look at bullet point 4, at that point, after that student shared that information with me, it led to several other discussions that were spawned out of that people began to chime in on, and we began sharing back and forth about these particular issues. And if you'll notice in bold print there on the 5th point on this slide, it was as if the class just came alive with conversations that were meaningful to people as people shared their experience with some of these things and some issues they were currently going through. And other students would chime in and say, "Yeah, I've been through that," and offered advice or recommendations on how to help people during these difficult times. And what I found out through this very unpredicted moment, I really wasn't prepared for it, is just listening to the students and how they were helping each other became very, very meaningful. And I can honestly say that night, the PowerPoint that I had prepared and was ready to discuss, we ended up moving that to the side in a real way, and we just listened to each other. And it was very powerful for me to watch what developed at that point. Most quality learning experiences are not planned. I don't know if you're aware of that, but they tend to be organic and spontaneous, and they just happen. And in this case, it did. And I could sense a lot of anxiety and stress and nervousness began to be reduced on the part of the students. Although, as I said, developing relationships in an online format can be very, very challenging. I could just sense that people were getting a lot out of this and the entire class. And if you're wondering how many students typically show up for one of my Zoom sessions, it's anywhere on the high end, about 75. I have had 3 full screens of 25 students on each screen. You just, toggle back and forth between them. High of about 75 all the way down to 5 or so. But this particular night, there was about 50 students present for this class. And it just, I was amazed at how well sharing about these particular personal struggles and situations, how they were helping each other. And me being able to moderate that, it was like the flipped classroom where the students become the teacher and the teacher becomes a student. It kind of took on that kind of aura about it as we worked through that night. And so what, if you'll notice in parentheses down there at the bottom on that last bullet point on slide 3, I've got a reminder there to myself to explain about what happened the extra hour. What happened at that point is when I realized how powerful this was, I offered our students the next week, I said, look, I'm required to get us through a certain amount of material every night, but I do enjoy hearing from you, and I think we could all benefit from it. So won't you just hang around after this, after the first hour, and we'll just have another one of these sessions, and we'll just listen to each other talk and how we can help each other, and the particular advice that was delivered, and they all said okay. And so I made that hour optional, and what started that night was something that I began, and it became a part of my routine. And students log in, and we still do this day. I've been doing it for 3 years now, and it has been very, very, very rewarding for me to be able to help students see that hey, we care. Brad, on the previous presentation by Simon, I think right there towards the end, he mentioned about caring, and you had kind of giving him credit about caring. The old statement of students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I can't tell you how true that is. And so there's a lot of rewards, especially for the teacher, and even more so for the student during these particular situations. So let me transition to slide 4 right quick. What does the research say? You guys that are maybe old timers and younger people probably won't even recognize this first entry of Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Pablo Freire. I do realize this is dated material, but what made me think about all these particular dynamics with the student and teacher relationships was that book. We had to read it for my doctoral degree. And I just remember thinking back to how he always pointed out that the teachers never seemed to take a personal interest in their students in his country of Brazil. And he was offended by that. And he said, true education can't take place until the teachers really understand what the students are going through. And so a little more recent research is this article that I mentioned here, the teacher-student relationship in online classes, which was published in 2016. There's not a whole lot of research about this, but I do want you to know this is one particular thing that have become very interested in. But to look at the third bullet point on slide 4, I always knew in 30 years as a school employee, the quality of learning experience always came back. The important variable to consider is the teacher. Great teachers do great things for kids, and there's wonderful things that go on. And we noticed that in public education. And so I began to realize, hey, it's a lot up to me as to how this goes for these students. Where am I at today? I need you to understand I'm struggling in that dark area between theory and practice. I have a tremendous amount of practice, 30 years to show for it as a public school employee. But the theory part for me is where I've always struggled with. And so I'm not like many of you who have many scholarly research articles to your credit, and you have a lot of background in that part of it. I am woefully deficient in that. However, I'm very rich in this area of being a practitioner. The Servant Leader by Robert Greenleaf, we all know, is an important work in this area. And it's taken on a new life for me, thinking through some of the concepts that he published in that very rewarding book to read. And I'm going to transition now to about 3 or 4 slides of some comments that have happened once I changed to this format of adding an additional hour that I'm available for. It's totally optional to the students. And if you're wondering, out of those 50 that stayed present, maybe how many hang in there? Well, it depends from week to week, depending on their particular schedules. But those that can will hang with me for that hour, and we just talk through some of these issues. And sometimes it it's a personal issue. A lot of times it's a professional issue. And I'm dealing with teachers who are studying and are working on an advanced degree to become administrators. And many of them bring classroom problems into this discussion, and other teachers help them work through this, or they offer suggestions on how to help with those particular situations, be it a parent relationship that's gone bad, or a student relationship that they're struggling with, or a particular setup with what's going on. And what it leads to is a very, very rewarding time. And so let me transition to slide 5, 6, 7 along in there. And I just I'm a little hesitant to do this because I don't want it to sound like I'm bragging. I share this with you so that you understand that this has become a very rewarding and meaningful work for me because of what you see starting there on slide 5. These were emails that have been sent to me over the last 3 years. And I don't say this to brag. I mean to tell you that I'm sharing with you, this is something that has become very rewarding because of these particular comments that you're reading on the screen. You've probably already read all of those so far. One of the ones I'm very proud of is that third comment on this slide: engaging, interactive, and inspirational lessons. Having as much practice as I have, and my career is steeped in that practice, allows me a lot of stories. It allows me to tell a lot of real world experience or real life experiences. And I've been out there and done it. And that's what leads to a lot of these particular comments. If you look on slide 6, mentions real life experiences there. I pride myself on lessons that are relevant and engaging. And one student mentioned that there in the third comment on slide 6. Again, not trying to toot my own horn, but just wanting to share with you how this has become, like I said, it's a job. And if you're wondering, it's a job that I really love. If you're wondering about that background as administrator, I just want to be clear with you about this. The last job I had as superintendent in Texas, I was making $160,000 a year. Wonderful money. The money's great. But I can tell you sometimes the headaches that go along with earning that $160,000 a year they are astronomical, and almost we were being presented with questions that we didn't have any answers to. And if you're wondering why my hair is so white or gray, I can honestly tell you I earned every bit of that. Many sleepless nights trying to figure out what to do. And I had no handle on politics. And I can promise you that job, I make less than half of what I made as a superintendent. And I wouldn't go back to that position for no amount of money. You have much more. This is so much more rewarding. And I'm glad to say I survived a career as a superintendent, but I'm even more proud to say that I'm a college professor working with students on a personal level. That has tremendous meaning. Let me share just a couple other slides with you here. This one, there's a reference to SEL, social and emotional learning there embedded in that first comment on slide 7. I'm very proud of that. If you're wondering where do you try to stay with this, on Bloom's taxonomy, those 6 levels, if you concentrate on the first 2 levels, you're not going to get much meaning out of that. But if you'll concentrate on those upper levels of Bloom's, or the affective and evaluative portions where you involve someone's emotions, it gets real in a hurry. And I like the comment that a student made here on point 2 on this one, but the best of these, this on slide 8, and I've moved on. This is my last slide. I'm almost through with this presentation, and I'll be quiet and listen because I'd like to hear from you or anybody who's listening about this. But this last comment on slide 8 is the one I'm probably most proud of. This was an email that sent back in 2020, I believe. Then the particular student here said, I wanted to write and say how much I enjoyed your class. The real world examples bring the curriculum to life and made the class so much more engaging. I also enjoyed the textbook. The textbooks that I choose, I make sure that they are going to help a student who's going into a real world situation. Brad, and you guys that are listening, I want you to know that there are certain school districts here in Texas that will not hire students who come from completely online programs because they feel like they don't have the personal connections and the personal abilities to make a difference. And that's been the challenge for me is designing learning experiences that are meaningful, rewarding, relevant, and engaging. And you'll notice here, the textbook was easy to read, and before I realized it, she had finished it in 3 weeks. And the assignments were relevant and definitely made me apply what I'd learned to past and current experiences. The second point on this bullet on this slide, the second bullet on this slide was made by the same student. And this is kind of one thing that I wanted us to nail home with in this presentation. She said, "I must admit the second hour was what I looked forward to most on Wednesday. It was so nice to interact with peers on a whole new level. Keep doing what you're doing. You're a difference maker." And that part about being a difference maker, I want each of you to understand. As a superintendent, when I interviewed potential teachers, I would always tell them, I don't need an employee. I need a difference maker. I need you to go in there and take care of those kids' needs and provide for them a very meaningful and relevant learning experience. And so I just need you to know it's with a tremendous amount of humility that I offer these comments to you, letting you see that this is something that I have really, really enjoyed as a college professor. And so I would encourage on this last slide, your thoughts. There's my email address, twilliams@se.edu. And I'm hopefully going to this will produce a scholarly article on my part with research. Hopefully, probably is going to be more qualitative than quantitative at this point. But would just like to hear from the audience if they're all 2 or 3 of you. If there are, so I'll turn it back to you guys.
Todd, what a great presentation, and I appreciate so much your thoughts and the extra efforts that you put in to connect with your students. And I agree with Simon, who commented in the chats, that it is so nice to hear the comparison between being a college professor and a school superintendent. I too am a former high school principal, certified superintendent, and so I understand the path that you've walked, and it's so nice that you've carried that personal connection that you have with your students into the college classroom. Because as we've moved to that online platform, it does take some creativity and some ingenuity to make those connections, and it sounds like you've done a nice job with that.
Yeah, well, man, I didn't realize I had my computer screen all turned up that way, but thanks for the kind comments. I just know that this is, I wasn't sure what I was getting into as a college professor, but I can tell you this has been a very rewarding career for me, one that I look forward to every Wednesday night. I do think that I would be better in person. I wish that I could have that face-to-face contact with students, but unfortunately, that's not the format or nature of our program. And so the challenge has been, as I said, establishing quality personal relationships, albeit through the mode of delivery that we're using.
Sure. Yes, we've all made that adjustment pretty quickly in recent months.